You're with Newsday. We're taking you live to Canberra. The Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, is responding to those inflation figures.
North of 6%, but it's still confronting. This is not a surprising outcome, but it's a confronting outcome. It's not news to millions of Australians who feel this inflation challenge every time they go to the supermarket and every time the bills arrive. This inflation outcome today mirrors the lived experience of Australians who are doing it tough right now. If you have a look at the release from the ABS when it comes to inflation, as you know, it rose by 1.8% in the June quarter to be 6.1% higher through the year. This is the highest rate of annual inflation since June 2001. It is the equal highest inflation in the inflation targeting period. And that's the headline number. Obviously, the trimmed mean was 4.9% through the year in the June quarter, which was stronger than the market expected. And so these are confronting numbers when it comes to the cost of living pressures that Australians in every corner of our country are feeling. Inflation is high and rising. It will get tougher before it starts to ease. The reality is that this quarterly outcome doesn't yet include the electricity price spike that came in July. So these numbers are obviously for the June quarter, and there is price pressure to follow the period that we are learning more about today. Before I get on to the IMF, I wanted to welcome the Bureau of Stats indicating in the release today that they will release next month a paper on how they can provide more frequent updates on the CPI, heading towards a monthly indicator. I think we've all in different ways spoken at different times about how hard it is to keep track of official inflation when it comes out quarterly. And so I really wanted to welcome Dr. Gruen's efforts in this regard and the ABS to try and give us more frequent updates on inflation, on the CPI in our economy. Now, the inflation in our economy is primarily, but not exclusively, global. There are domestic factors as well. And that's why we are focused as a government in dealing with some of the supply chain issues which are pushing up inflation here in Australia, whether it be the issues around labour shortages or whether the issues about a lack of resilience in our supply chains. I think Australians understand when they're at the supermarket, when prices are going through the roof, that this challenge is partly global, but there are domestic components of this challenge as well. And I wanted to reassure them that the government is very focused on those domestic factors. The global slowdown, which has been described by the International Monetary Fund, is very concerning to us as well. The global economy is treading a precarious and perilous path. And you can see that in the quite substantial downgrades that the IMF has released overnight. Now, the concerns that we all share centre on the American economy, of course. Their inflation problem is even more difficult than ours, and their central bank has indicated that they are prepared to intervene quite sharply, and so the rest of the world is watching that, monitoring that with great interest. There are issues out of China, particularly with the management of COVID. Still pursuing a version of COVID zero in China has implications for the global economy too. Obviously, Russia's illegal, immoral invasion of Ukraine has dire consequences for energy and food security, and we're all feeling that around the world as well. And then you've got vulnerable countries like Sri Lanka and others who are in some strife when it comes to the management and the maintenance of their debt. And so the IMF is reacting to those pressures and other pressures in sensibly downgrading their expectations for global growth. If you look at the release, as some of you have, they're downgrading the outlook for global growth this year to 3.2%. It was 3.6%. They expect that the global economy actually contracted in the second quarter of this year, and they expect global growth in 23 to further slow to something like 2.9%, which is 2/3 of a percentage point downgrade since the April outlook. And so that gives you a bit of a sense of the concerns that the IMF have and that we share here in Australia, given the potential impacts on our own economy. My ministerial statement tomorrow will show the combined impacts of rising interest rates and slowing global growth on our own economic growth here in Australia. It will be primarily focused on the economic forecasts rather than the budget forecasts. It will focus on the implications of this high inflation, which brings rising interest rates, and the implications of the global situation that the IMF has described, and what all of that means for Australians and for their economy as well. It will be confronting in the sense that what you can expect to see in the ministerial statement tomorrow is inflation revised up substantially, growth revised down, and all of the implications that brings. So the ministerial statement tomorrow will provide you with forecasts for inflation, for wages, for economic growth, for unemployment, and some of the related measures. It will also begin to describe what we expect that to mean for the budget in October when it comes to the bottom line. Many of you have followed closely the monthly release of the financial statements, which show that we've been very fortunate in the last budget year and the beginning of this budget year because of commodity prices and lower than expected unemployment, that we have had some things going for us in the budget. But what I will explain tomorrow and describe tomorrow is that the things that have been working for us in the budget are temporary, highly temporary, and some of the challenges are more enduring. And part of those enduring challenges in the budget will be the impact of some of the revisions that we'll have to do to our economic forecasts as well. I want to remind you, of course, that forecasting is always difficult, but particularly in volatile times like we find ourselves in now. The choice that I had to make was whether to wait until October or indeed wait until May when the original budget was scheduled before I provide these forecast updates. And there is always a risk in providing new forecasts, particularly out of cycle, because frequently, as we all know, forecasts are not bang on. But I wanted to make sure that Australians understood and understand the circumstances as we expect them to be over the coming months and years, so that they can understand the types of decisions that might be made necessary by those economic conditions. I'll finish on this set of points. We've got a lot going for us in Australia. We've had good prices for our commodities on global markets. We've got unemployment historically low, which is obviously very welcome. But one of the things, or one set of things that I think we really have going for us as well, and I detect it around Australia in the broader community, is there is an appetite for real talk about our economic position. There is a hunger after a decade of division for Australians to come together around our economic challenges. And there is an understanding that it is not possible to clean up 9 years of mess in 9 weeks. It will take time for us to get on top of these issues as I've described them, but we will get on top of them. Inflation will get worse before it gets better, but it will get better. Some of these other challenges, with the right policies and the right mindset and the right approach, and with some degree of patience, will turn around for us as well. But it's going to be a difficult time ahead, and the inflation numbers show that, as do the new forecasts from the IMF.